morning. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a community carols by candlelight. It was a community event organised by various community organisations in the oval near the town centre of this little town. I was given 2 to 3 minutes to share the story of Christmas. Okay. I turned up early and wandered around the oval. There were families gathering around picnics, food and drink, and there were food outlets around the oval and games and activities for the children, and children were running around with balls, and there was a stage at one end, and there was pre-entertainment, music and singing, and the backdrop though were the bushfires of 2019, and behind the stage out to the northwest were raging fires, and you could see the smoke billowing up, and as the sky grew darker through the evening, you could see some of the glow of these bushfires that threatened the surrounds of Sydney. Anyway, when the time came, I made my way backstage and received the instructions and microphones and where to stand, and 2 to 3 minutes only, and I went out and I looked down at this sea of people, a diversity of people, and most of them were just sitting in their little groups, eating and drinking and talking, oblivious to what was happening around them or on the stage. I delivered my probably somewhat benign 2-minute, 3-minute message of Christmas, trying to express something of the deep and profound meaning of this event and the love of God for us all and what that could mean. But how do you do that in 2 to 3 minutes? Anyway, I finished, and on came the artists, the groups who would sing carols, and the soloists who would do their items, and the MC who would fill in the gaps. And I wandered through the oval and looked, and as carols were singing and songs were sung and people were saying their bit about Christmas, some were listening attentively. Many were just engaged in their own little thing, their own little talking and community event around their own family or friends. And I wondered why they'd come out, what the intrigue of this event was. What did they expect? What did these people expect to see or hear or experience in this carols by candlelight? Did they expect to hear some message or story of Jesus, of God, of Christ? Did they pick up the messages and the themes in the carols, or in some of the words that I said, or some of the words that others said? Did they care? I guess there was a whole range of expectations and feelings, and I guess it was an important space in the midst of the whole mythology of Christmas and the whole expectation and the cultural conditioning around Christmas, around gatherings and seasons greetings and end of year functions and gift giving and blessing one another with cards and words of grace. And but what do we expect to hear and experience in Christmas? It seems to me that each year Christmas comes, it builds up slowly and then builds up to this big thing, and there seems to me a sense of expectation in the world about Christmas. But I'm not sure what we expect or what we hope to see or hear or find. And then it kind of fades and disappears into January and the languishing heat, the remains of Christmas dinner, the gifts and the paper that's scattered around, the Boxing Day test or Sydney to Hobart or holidays or whatever. It's gone yet again. And I wonder what we've expected into it. What do we come to Christmas expecting to see and hear, expecting it to be? It's a question that was triggered when I read this week's story, Matthew's story of Jesus this week. it again deals with John the Baptizer. We spoke of him last week. This eccentric, radical, prophetic figure who rages onto the screens of our lives this time every year, coming in the back blocks of Judah to proclaim this message of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, of baptized, of being cleansed. It's this figure who calls people out and calls them to account. And he breathes this judgment and violence and preparing the way for the one who will come. And his expectations seem to be that the one who will come will bring this divine justice and judgment of God. He will baptize not with water but with fire and spirit. And his winnowing fork is in his hand. And he will separate the chaff from the grain, from the wheat. And the chaff will burn in those endless fires. And the axe is laid at the root of the tree, and anything that doesn't bear fruit will be hacked down. It's violent judgment. What did the people come out to see and hear? That's what Jesus asked the crowd in response to a question from John. This is somewhat further on in the story, and John has upset the local king, and he's been put into prison. And he's languishing in probably what is a subterranean cell, an underground cell, rotting away, forgotten and lost, and awaiting death. And his disciples would come and tend to his needs and feed him. And at one point he asked them the question, go and ask this Jesus, is he the one? Or should we expect someone else? Did I prepare the way for the wrong one? It's a question that I guess we ask ourselves in different ways at different times. In the doctor's surgery, when we receive the news we don't expect to hear. In those long lines or long drawn out spaces of refugee camps, endless tents that we see on the news. Or the millions of slaves across the world and the stories we hear of them. Or those who live in hunger and starvation, or in want of clean water or hope. In all these stories we see on our screens and on the news and that come to us in different ways. Or in our personal life where there's grief or loss or pain or broken relationships. When we encounter the world that turns us upside down, and we ask those questions, God, are you the one? Or should we expect something else? Should we wait for something or someone else? Or are you the one? What are you doing? Isn't this all wrong? Isn't life supposed to be different? Didn't you promise something different? This is John's story. John was coming expecting that the one who would follow him, this Christ figure, this Christ, would bring justice onto the earth, would turn the world upside down in the way of God and restore all things. And it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And so we ask the question of Jesus, are you the one or is there someone else? And Jesus says to John's disciples, go and tell John what you've seen and heard and experienced. The deaf hear, the blind see, the lame walk, the broken heart and grieving are given hope. The dead are raised to life and the poor have good news preached to them. Go and tell John. Jesus' words are really turning John's expectations upside down. God doesn't drop in from above, bringing violence to violence or power to power to turn the way of the world upside down and right way round. God works from below and within and through people. And Jesus' way was to work with people, bringing the transformation of love and grace and hope and healing into each human life. And that they would be transformed and that they would share that transformation with others. And the world would change one life at a time, one community at a time, one town or village at a time. As people experience this deep and profound love that is renewing and healing and they would share it with others through acts of kindness and love, and generosity and self-sacrifice. Inclusive sharing and belonging into a community that is different, that is new, that breaks down the barriers and shares what we have with one another rather than accumulating for ourselves. And this story of Christmas invites us to consider life in a new way. And Jesus asked the crowd after he shared this witness, this testimony with John's disciples, answered the question. He says, what did you go to hear John speak? Did you expect to hear something soft and nice, a sentimental Santa Claus kind of story where people are naughty or nice and he's making a list and if you're really good you'll get something? Is it the sentimental story of a baby in a manger with mum and dad there, Mary and Joseph, and the cows and the sheep and the angels in the sky and a star? A nice nativity scene that's set out with our Christmas tree in the corner, nice and neat, that's then carefully packed up in January and put away until next year. Is that what we experience in Christmas, expecting Christmas? Nothing? Do we expect to encounter this living God, this face of Christ in the face of another? Friend or foe, person we know or don't know, the rich or the poor or in between? Do we expect to hear and encounter this God who will critique our lives, who will ask questions of us and say, well, you think you're loving, but what about this or that? Why have you got all those things accumulated in the corner? Christmas comes to us not just once a year, but it's there every day. If our eyes are open, as Jesus says, eyes and ears open, we will see and will hear. In those acts of love and beauty and wonder, God is present. And that's a transformative message for us and for our world. When we open our eyes to see the barrier reefs, the coral reefs of the world being decimated by the warming waters and the pollutants that infiltrate those oceans, or the glaciers and polar caps melting, or those long, big refugee camps of people living in hope that they might have freedom one day to live for their families, or those who seek food for their families to feed them, or clean water, or the women and girls in our world who seek an opportunity that's equal with men, or those who live in fear of violence of their father or husband or boyfriend or whoever it is, and what they might expect tonight. Christmas breaks in wherever there is justice, wherever there is acts of peace, where people put their lives on the line to bring peace and justice, where people act with love towards another and towards the creatures and the earth itself. And that's where Christmas is. And do we expect to hear Christmas in these places? What do we come expecting? What do we come hoping for? And will we allow it to change our lives?